Welcome to the Kim B. Davis Show. Here we'll talk to the leaders in technology, culture, business, and the arts. We'll cover politics, advocacy, motherhood, writing, mental health, and mostly we'll focus on hope. Join Kim B. Davis, author, playwright, radio personality, event consultant, professional speaker on the Kim B. Davis Show.
Good evening and welcome to the Kim B. Davis Show. I'm your host, Kim B. Davis. And tonight it is my pleasure to introduce to you Audrea V. She is an author, CEO, and the publisher for IBG Publications. Good evening, Audrea. How are you?
Good evening. I'm well. How about yourself?
I'm great. So,
Good.
I've been asking this question for the last few guests that I've had. It's 2020. It's been pandemic. It's been one thing after another. The murder of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor. We continue to see those types of videos. We continue to see unrest across our nation. Now we have political gridlock. We are in the second wave of a shutdown. And a lot of people are saying, how do I cope? You're going to share a story that has an incredible amount of pain. But before you get to that story, will you tell people or share with people how you are getting through the year of 2020?
You know, that's a question that is, like everybody else, we've had to find a new way of doing things. Nothing has been normal, such as for me, I've just been coping by staying busy, getting creative, learning to come outside my box. And actually learning how to flow with what I have been wanting to do for years. I actually wanted to do this whole electronic thing for years when it comes to the way I do business, ministry, and everything else. And I was made fun of years ago, probably around about 2009, 2008, 9, around in that bracket. And I was made fun of because I was actually pastoring the church. And I was like, we're going to meet weekly on a conference call. And then we're only going to get together physically once a month. This was over 10 years ago, Kim, that I was, going to operate like this. And pastors told me, you're not going to get a church. No one's going to follow you. People are not going to want to do it that way. And it was challenging at that time. But now here we are over 10 years later. And so everybody has been forced to do it that way. So I guess, so to speak, I've been ahead of my time. So I'm actually coming to a place of comfort, of wanting to do it this way and just, get creative when it comes to business. I've had to learn new skill sets. I've had to learn new trades because money kind of went in a different direction. So you got to kind of go with the flow of the traffic versus against it. So I've learned how to do things different, become comfortable with the way I've always wanted to do things. So it's been challenging at times, but for the most part, I've learned to find a place of comfort in being at home because, I try to limit how much I go out. Isolation is challenging because you do want to get out and, talk to people, have conversation, go have coffee without all the stigma of a mask and, all of that. But for the most part, I thank God I haven't gotten, contracted COVID or anything like that. So I've just been keeping it safe, going with the flow.
That's really good advice. And thank you for sharing that. Now I want to pivot over to your story, because when you were telling your story, I was like, wow, that's incredible. I don't know how you deal with that. And so you have suffered an incredible loss in your life. And so why don't you tell us about it and how it sort of shaped your journey into what it is that you do now?
So it was 1998. And at that time, I was a 23-year-old woman. And I know I still look young. I love to say that.
You do.
still look young. And I'm actually only 45, and I don't mind telling my age because it helps people to understand where I was in life when what happened to me happened.
Mm-hmm.
But I was a very young woman, 23 years old, and I lived at home with my son and my grandmother.
Okay.
And I was the primary caregiver for my grandmother and my son. My grandmother was a double amputee, so I have to say that to kind of paint the picture of how things unfolded like they did.
Mm-hmm.
But my grandmother was a double amputee, diabetic, the chronic symptoms of a diabetic. At that point in life, she was pretty much dependent on me, to cook her meals, to make sure she got her shots. My son was not quite 2 years old. So just to paint the picture on how small he was not quite 2 years old. And I was their primary caregiver from the time I woke up in the morning to go to work, take care of her, come back. It was just a back and forth thing of the responsibilities that I had. And I need people to understand how old I was, because that was a lot of responsibility for a 23-year-old girl, because that's really what I was. I was a girl. I was not quite a woman yet, even at 23. But I was a primary caregiver, and that particular day of the fire, there was a fire that erupted. And that particular day, it was a normal day. I had cooked, we had ate, gone to church, done the usual Sunday things. It was the day before Labor Day.
Mm-hmm.
And that night I fell asleep across my bed. I put my son to bed. My grandmother was pretty much gone to bed. She slept in our living room, on our couch in the living room.
Okay.
And I had fallen asleep, and I recall waking up to her yelling my name. And when I woke up, I was just kind of startled, because normally when she would wake me up, she would say something like, "You left the fan on," or "A light is still on," or something like that. So it did not behoove me. The way I went downstairs, just to be transparent, was in my underclothes, because that's all I had on. And so I get downstairs, and right at the foot of the steps, there's a fire that just kind of erupted out of the middle of our floor in our foyer.
Mm-hmm.
And so my first instinct was, let's get out the house. That was my first instinct. And my grandmother was just adamant that the fire was not that big. I could put this fire out. And so I called 911, and the fire department was not even 5 minutes away from our house. So I assumed that they would come quickly because they weren't far from us.
Mm-hmm.
But nevertheless, I followed my grandmother's instructions, going against my own instinct. And I started trying to put the fire out. And I know I ran back and forth at least 4 or 5 times with a pail of water, just trying to put this fire out. But the more water I put on it, the more the fire spread, because the fire actually started brewing inside of the wall. So it was not going to be contained by me. So nevertheless, I tried to put the fire out and went back and forth several times. No success. It just did more spreading than going out.
Mm-hmm.
So at this point, I was just like, I need to get help. I can't do this on my own. Let me go get help. So I went outside exactly like I was, because I was just oblivious of, the state of what was really happening. Nothing was mentally registering of what was really going on.
Mm-hmm.
So I went outside to get help, assuming the fire department would be there, but learned that fire department was out on another call. So they were not as close to the house as I assumed that they were. And so at that time, because it was 1998, I'm outside, I'm running around, I'm screaming, I'm yelling, "God, please, save my baby. Don't let my baby die. Don't let my grandmother die." These are things I'm running around just screaming, calling out to Jesus, because this is all I knew how to do.
Mm-hmm.
And at that point, the neighbors start coming out of their houses, trying to see what was going on. People going down the street were stopping, because at this point, the fire has shot up the side of the house, because now it's totally uncontrollable. And I panicked, just for somebody to understand, I just panicked, I didn't think, stop and get her out. Because at this time, like I said, the fire's out of control.
Mm-hmm.
And so I got on the phone, and I got on the neighbor's phone, just start calling family, telling them that there's a fire going on. You got to get here. A neighbor puts a sheet on me, because I don't have no clothes on. So a neighbor puts a sheet on me. Another neighbor eventually put a dress on me. So even in the midst of everything that was going on, it was like God was there just covering and taking care of us, taking care of me and my family who showed up on the scene, because later somebody actually came and started ministering Jesus Christ to us. So it was just like all of this was going on the scene. Finally, the fire department's there. They're busting out windows. And in my mind, I'm going, why are they busting out our windows? We have to live here. Because again, it's just mentally things are just not registering. And so they eventually brought my grandmother out, and they knew when they saw her that she was gone. And so just to appease us, they brought her out the house and laid her on the front porch and said, we have to call the coroner. And it was just like, we just lost anything that was within us at that moment. And so by the time they brought her out, they had already asked me where my son was. So they went up and got him, brought him out. And it was a combination of the heat and the smoke that consumed him. So by the time he came out, the side of his face was just melted off. And they put him on a stretcher, put him inside an ambulance. So again, nothing's registering. So I don't even, get in the ambulance with him because I'm still concerned about my grandmother. Mm-hmm. But a family member who was there actually got in the ambulance with him, rode to the hospital with him and everything. And so by the time they said my grandmother was gone, it was just like, okay, there's nothing else I can do here. So I go to the hospital where my son is, and I get there and my cousin's walking back and forth, pacing outside the hospital. And I'm like, asking him, where's my son? And he's not answering me. So finally, I'm just done yelling and screaming at him. I go inside and I go into the little room, and the doctor says, the baby didn't make it. He went in his sleep. And I was just like, no. I was like, this is not real. I said, my baby, I'm going to get my baby. And I got up to go get my son. And as soon as I turned around to walk away, I just collapsed on the floor. And all I remember is waking up inside of a hospital bed. People were coming in and out of the room. I'm on oxygen because I had inhaled a lot of smoke, and I didn't even realize I was inhaling the smoke, trying to put the fire out. And so that's where what I call my evolution began, or where things in my life started to take a serious change. Because after that, I carried a lot of guilt. I carried a lot of regret. I carried a lot of pain from everybody else. It's been recently that I realized how much I really was carrying, because it was just a lot. The investigation from the fire department, they wanted to say I started the fire because they were trying to understand how I was the only person who made it out the house. So they literally brought in arson dogs, to investigate. They looked into insurance, and my name was on nothing. When I say my name was on nothing, I didn't even have an insurance policy for my son. My grandmother did not put me on any of her policies. She actually tried 2 months prior to the fire, but her attorney didn't return her call. So she wasn't able to put my name on anything. So they were trying to determine, did she have something to gain? Was there money involved, and none of that. I didn't have anything to gain, from the circumstances. I just panicked, and I don't, and all these 20 something years later, because now it's been 22 years, I still don't have an explanation besides I panicked. And it was a lot of judgment. The fire department, they got on the TV and said she should have saved them, and she should have did this, she should have did that. And God later vindicated me at different places, but I still was carrying my own guilt. I was carrying my own weight of, I wish I wouldn't have listened to her, and had I done it this way, it was just so many things that could have happened, along the way. And I just, there just was no answer. So I just began that's when I developed a relationship with God. And that's when I developed a relationship to understand, why was I still alive? Why am I still here? What purpose do I have, still being here? And that's when I actually started writing. I would journal. I would write my emotions at times when there was the anniversary of their death, because I would get depressed every year around September 7th. I would just go into a depression, because it was like I was revisiting, the incident, and every year it became fresh and real again. And then there were the birthdays. My son's birthday is actually coming up in another week and a half. And so with the birthdays, and it was my grandmother's birthday, and, I had just lost my father like a year and a half prior to this incident.
Mm.
So I hadn't even had the opportunity to process his death because I went right into caregiving for my grandmother. So the depression was real. I would never have tried to kill myself, but if somebody had killed me or I just passed away, I was ready to go because that's just the suicidal, atmosphere that was around me. Like I don't have a reason to live anymore because they shaped my whole world. And so I started writing. It was my release. It was my outlet. It was the only place I could express myself without judgment. And I just started realizing that when I write and I journal, no one's judging me there. So just for someone who likes to journal and write or doesn't know how to express what they're going through, just start writing it down, just start journaling it. And it was keeping a journal from the time it happened to, because I was like, it was almost like I was living in two worlds. One world, I was depressed, I was sleeping all the time. I didn't want to bathe myself. These were the signs of the grief and the depression. And so I lived in that world where I didn't want to do anything. And I would lay in the bed and sleep for days and listen to the answering machine because I didn't want to talk to anybody. And then there were times where I would spend time in prayer and I would do church work and I would do things to stay busy. So I kind of lived in between those two worlds. But I always kept a journal and I always wrote. And I always knew that one day I wanted to be in a position to help someone else. I knew that what I had gone through, it wasn't just for me. I was still here to show someone else that they could come through the same type of depression. You can go and have loss and still find hope in living. And so that's the reason why I wrote my first book, because I just wanted to help someone. I didn't know it would turn into everything it has turned into. That was not, if you could have told me in 2009 when I released my first book that I would be doing all this now, I wouldn't have believed you because it wasn't my ambition. It was just, I want to help somebody who might be going through to see you have a reason to live outside of what happened, even though it seems like you're the person to blame. Like I was the person to blame, from everybody on the outside looking in. My son's father, he actually tried suing me. It was about money and he didn't end up getting as much as he thought he would get. But, I went through that process where I had to sit in front of lawyers and attorneys and judges and give an account why I didn't save my son, and that was a question that arose. And I had to just say that I just believe that God, was in the midst of it even then. That's the only explanation. I just don't have no other explanation. I don't know who believes in God or who doesn't, but that's the only explanation I could come up with, And so writing just became my saving grace. It became the thing that gave me the opportunity to help someone else. Because every book I write is about helping somebody through some kind of circumstance, So that is, where my journey started, how I got to this place. I love to write. I actually found a passion in writing. If I could do nothing else but just write for the rest of my life, I would write because I just love doing it that much. But that's how my journey began, how I got where I am, and even being in a position to help someone else publish their book. So it's a beautiful journey. It's been a hard journey, but overall, I can say all things truly have worked together for my good because I am the called according to his purpose. So that's how my journey started and how it's, where I am right now.
Wow, that is an amazing story. There is a lot of pain there.
Yes.
I'm gonna go back to something, but first tell us what the name of your book that you wrote in 2009 is.
The name of my book is called Through the Fire. I actually have redone it several times, but this time I'm relaunching it on December 18th because that's my son's birthday. So I thought that that was a fitting day to tell my story again. And so it's called Through the Fire. It will be available on Amazon once it finally releases, but it's called Through the Fire.
Okay. So you said that your son's father sued you, which is incredible to me that he would sue you, but I'm assuming it was a wrongful death suit.
Right.
Who who in your family, or was it your son's father, was the hardest person on you, if you wouldn't mind sharing, in terms of making you feel guilty?
Hmm. It really wasn't, people in my family really wouldn't come directly to me,
Okay.
but I actually would just pick up on the fact that they just wasn't feeling me, for lack of better words.
Mhm.
It actually did get back to me when the fire first happened that there were family members who wanted to file the wrongful death.
Mm,
So I did actually deal with that. I never got any names of who it was,
mhm.
but I never, nobody never actually would confront me. I had one aunt who, um, God rest her soul,
Mhm.
but when she would get drunk, she would talk about, my sister died in that fire, and she still would never come directly at me with it, but you still hear that, and how can you not take offense to that? You know
Mhm.
what I mean?
Mhm. Mhm.
So they wouldn't actually come directly to me, but the accusations were there. Now, when it comes to my son's father, he probably was the hardest person on me, but it was because of his own guilt. It
Mhm.
wasn't because, and really because, honestly, just being transparent, me and him were not in a relationship, hadn't been in one for over a year when this happened.
Mhm.
But my son was young. So he felt in his mind, because he's a baby, he doesn't have to take up the time with him.
Ah,
So it wasn't that I didn't keep my son from him, because his people lived a block up from me, and his sister would keep my son all the time.
mhm.
So I never kept my son away from him. It was his guilt that riddled on him. And so he just took it out on me because of his own guilt that he didn't take the time. And the perfect example of that is the night of the fire. He actually came to my house that night. But when he came, my son wasn't there. He was out with my mother getting something for dinner. And
Mhm.
so he wasn't there when he came.
Mhm.
And so he was all dressed up, had been in his friend's wedding. And he was like, you know, I just stopping by. I said, well, you can hang around, a couple more minutes. He'll be here. You can just wait around and he'll be here. He said,
Mhm.
nah, I'm just stopping by. And he left. So
Wow.
that was his guilt trip, because he had the opportunity to see him for the last time. But because he was so busy trying to get at me, he
Mhm.
missed his opportunity.
Mhm.
So, the lawsuit was just a part of him really trying to get money, but it ended up, and I didn't tell this part, it ended up backfiring against him, because he had to sue four parties in order for this lawsuit to go through. So he had to sue me, he had to sue my grandmother's estate, and
Oh.
he had to sue the insurance company who insured the house. And
Mhm.
then he had to sue the phone company, because they were trying to say it was faulty phone wires that caused the fire.
Mhm.
But there were never any reports that phone wiring caused the fire. They actually ruled the fire undetermined. They never determined the cause of this fire. And so he had to sue those four parties. Now, mind you, he told me that this was going to happen before it actually transpired.
Mm.
How? Because he said they told him that they had to sue me because I was the one who left him. So technically, I was the one considered liable,
Mhm.
for his death.
Mhm.
Long story short, it did not go to court. It only made it to the deposition process. However, when it was all said and done, the insurance company of the house decided to pay out about 7 grand.
Okay.
After the attorney got his cut,
Right.
there was only about 3,000 left, and he still had to split that with me
Mhm.
because I'm the mother.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
although he was trying to sue me, it backfired on him, because he still ended up having to give, me money. And those are the things I feel like God used to validate me,
Mhm.
and no amount of money will ever bring my son back. No amount of money will bring any level of comfort. But
Mhm.
it's just the fact that him trying to do it against me, and there were other incidents. He would call on my answering machine and leave nasty messages. So he probably was the person that was the hardest. Family wouldn't come at me directly, but he was the person that was the hardest to deal with.
And thank you for sharing that, because you gave me what I was looking for. I was wondering if people were taking their guilt about either not being there, not being
Mm-hmm.
as supportive, or doing what they
Mm-hmm.
should have done, and putting that off on you while you're
Mm-hmm.
going through grieving the loss.
Yeah.
Because as you said, you panic, and lots of situations happen where people panic and people don't know what to do.
Mm-hmm.
Days when I see people who say, "Yeah, I rushed into that building and I did this," and I'm like, I don't even know if I would have
Right.
the wherewithal to do that.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
thank you for sharing that story. Um,
No problem.
Tell us, because you wrote Through the Fire, and as you said, you're re-releasing it on December 18th, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And then you have several other books that you've written. They're in the same theme in terms of pain, taking pain and turning it into purpose.
Yes.
A little
Yes.
bit about that.
So the second book I wrote is called The Tears of a Lonely Mother,
Mhm,
and it is specifically for mothers who've lost children.
mhm,
And I follow it up with a journal to help mothers journal through their, it's like a therapy
mhm,
type of journal. They can post pictures of their baby, pictures when they were pregnant, the child's milestones, funny stories about their children. So it helps to bring up, happy times, instead of not always dealing with the pain of the loss.
mhm.
So those were some follow-ups I did to Through the Fire. And then I also did a book called Peace in Broken Places, Exposing Lies and Toxic Ties.
Ooh,
That particular book I wrote stemming from the loss of my mother,
mhm,
because after I lost my mother, I got into a lot of toxic relationships because
mhm,
of the denial that I was in that my mother had died. Now I knew she had died. We'd gone through the funeral, but I just was in denial.
mhm,
And so I got into a lot of toxic relationships. So I talk about the 12 signs of a toxic relationship in that particular book.
okay,
And then my most recent book is called Right to Empower. And I
mhm,
actually show you in Right to Empower how to take those painful experiences and turn them into a book. So I
oh,
actually kind of give you step by step on, the pain points, how it becomes positive, and then how to go ahead and structure it into an actual book. Because
okay,
that's how I developed Through the Fire. It was strictly from journal notes. It was strictly from, what, not just telling the painful side of the story,
mhm,
because to me that's just entertainment. If
mm,
I just tell you what happened, how it happened, you can become entertained by that to a degree. But
right,
I want to go past that. I want to show you, here are the signs of grief and depression.
mm,
Here is how you turn this tragic situation into something positive. And so that's what Right to Empower does. It shows you how to take those painful experiences and make them into a book. And I actually developed a superhero in that particular book. And the superhero's name is Danae Sotera,
okay,
and her superwoman name is Scribblina. And
mhm,
so she actually rescues people in pain and so that they can write their books. So
oh,
that's the most recent. I'm going to actually develop her into a whole comic book series and further on down the line. But that's the most recent book I wrote. I actually have a coaching program that goes along with it as well, because sometimes people need prayer, they need therapy, they need help, getting past those roadblocks. Because I had those roadblocks, when I would read my story back in black and white, it was a different experience,
mm,
than just writing it. So sometimes people need that little extra push, and that's what Right to Empower does. It gives them that push.
fantastic. It sounds like, and it looks like you have really taken your pain and really turned it into a purpose, and especially made yourself available to help others. Is that how your publishing company started?
Yes, it is actually. After I wrote my first book, I self-published. At that time, I wasn't doing IBG publications. I just self-published, and it really just was off of a word that I got from the Lord, because everybody I went to get published, nobody would publish my story.
Mhm.
So it got to a point where it was just like, do it yourself. Now I had no clue what to do or get started, but I bought a book.
Mhm.
Just like I have a book to help someone, at that time I bought a book. walked through the steps and published, self-published. And then people started asking me, how did you get it done? Can you help me? And that's how I started helping authors get their books done.
Wow. So if there is an author that is watching or listening, how would they contact you, or what do they need to do to send you something so that if you're interested in publishing their work?
They can go to my website. They can go to I as in inspired, B as in by, G as in God, ibgpublications.com. When you go to the very first page of the website, there is a tab that says, are you an aspiring author? Click here. So as soon as you land on the website, there's a tab, you click it. It allows you to schedule an appointment with me, and then we can meet, talk about your book, you know, and things of that nature. So they can do that, or they can reach me by email at admin@ibgpublications.com. So they can either email or they can go directly to the website and schedule an appointment.
Fantastic. All right. So I have one last question because our time is almost up.
Okay.
So you have been through what I would consider to be a very difficult situation, one that many people often struggle, whether it's the loss of a child, the loss of a spouse, or a parent. And we see people every day who struggle with that loss.
Yes.
We're in a pandemic, and lots of people have lost people. They've lost loved ones for all different types of reasons. My husband works in the hospital, and he just told me a couple of days ago that he had to talk to another family because he had witnessed an 8-year-old dying of COVID out in the hospital. And so I would ask you, what advice would you give to parents, mothers, fathers, grandmothers, grandfathers, aunts, uncles who are struggling through a loss and how they can move forward?
The first thing I would say is be okay with the process, because we get pressured from people on the outside looking in who don't know what we're experiencing or what we're going through. And so be okay with the process. That process could be you need time to just be alone. That process could be you just crying all the time. That process could be you want someone to talk to, or you don't want to talk to anyone at all. You could be angry because you don't understand why you're going through what you're going through. Be okay with that process, but understand that at some point you got to start moving on. At some point, the process could take 4 or 5 years. No one can put a time limit on how long it really takes for you to grieve and move past that loss. Be okay with that. Don't feel pressure that, you know, well, because someone else is over it, I should be over it too. Or, you know, especially if it's a husband and wife situation with a child, you know, the husband might find his way of coping by getting busy at work, and the wife might find her way of coping by sitting in the child's room all the time. Don't judge each other because they want to go on and work and you just want to sit here and remember. Don't judge the other person. You know, that's the other thing I would say. But it's a process for everybody involved. This has to be the worst year that I've seen so much death this year. But death is inevitable. You know, it's unfortunate. We all have to go at some point. But be okay with the process, you know, however long it takes. It took me over 10 years to write my book. It wasn't no 5-year journey and I was done, you know, and even when I released it, that's been 10 years. But honestly, Kim, this has been the first year that I've really been talking about it, you know, since I released it 10 plus years ago. So this is the first year I've been comfortable. Before it was, I was just handing people a book because that's what I felt comfortable doing. But now I'm actually telling the story, talking about it, and actually in a position where I'm actually ready to help people, you know, besides just giving them a book. So it's a process, you know, be okay with that process and don't let anyone make you feel any kind of way for where you are.
Thank you, Audrea. That's a perfect way to end this interview. Tell us how we can reach you, how we can find you, and how we can get order your books?
You can find me on social media across all platforms as IBG Publications. That's Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. So IBG Publications. You can purchase your books either at Amazon.com. If you put my name in the search engine, Audrea V Heard, my page comes right up, and you can choose from the books that I have available. You can also go through the website as well, ibgpublications.com. There's a whole lot of great stuff on the website. Please visit the website. But those are the places that you can find me online.
And what was the name of your website again?
ibgpublications.com.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Audrea V. Heard, for being on the Kim B. Davis Show. I hope that when your next book comes out, that you will join us and share more of your story. And again, I applaud you for sharing your story, for having the ability to transform your pain into purpose and to be able to help others. You are doing nothing but being a blessing to other people. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you guys for watching the Kim B. Davis Show. I hope that you will tune into our next episode. And as always, remember, be magnificent.